So what you're saying is that you're a grower.
Thanks, check. Absolutely. Are we live?
We are live.
Because I have a little bit of a bit to do right now, and it's not just talking about how my hair is getting down to my tits. I want it effortlessly down to my tits, though, not just like where I have to like pull on it. You know what I mean? Rub it, get it full of blood. What? No. I have a piece of mail which I just only started to open. You know, just on the corners, kind of nervously right now. But I don't know what's in it. But I think I might know what's in it.
I'm very curious to know what's in it.
We're just gonna check. It is from a government office, so it could be good or it could be bad.
I think I know what's in it.
We're just gonna see if my God damn it, it is not. Yep. Nope. Nope.
No?
Son of a gun. It is not.
Wow.
Yeah, this is not what we wanted it to be.
Is it is it bad or is it just not anything?
No, it's talking about signing into a lot of the American Rescue Plan, a lot that will help vaccinate Americans and deliver immediate economic relief.
So it's
bad. Yeah.
I feel for you, man. It's a hard world out there.
Wait. Because I got direct deposited is what it is telling me.
Oh.
So it ends up that it's being good. God, this is some poofy stuff happening right now. Welcome to Kingpilled, everybody.
What's up, people? We are running late, as usual, as is standard for this podcast. We don't tend to do very many things on time here. But
as is my damn... I wanted to check that I could hold with my feet and take a picture of. This dude's not into foot pics.
Yeah, Amy is definitely not into foot pics.
No,
very
That's
much.
Too bad.
She was
very much not, huh?
Yeah, she was like scrolling through your thing. She's got a thing about feet. Feet just gross her out. So she's like scrolling through the timeline and she's like, "Oh, feet. Oh, Steven."
Some people really do have a thing with feet.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. I have never had opinions about feet. I mean, I enjoy the fact that I have feet. Those are they're very helpful to me. But otherwise I've never managed to muster strong opinions about feet. But my delightful bride has strong opinions about many things, and that's one of the reasons that I love her.
If I just get back to this letter for a minute, you know, blah blah blah, a plan that will help vaccinate America and deliver immediate economic. It's just like, look, all I need from you, Joseph, is just like a little note. Doesn't even have to be handwritten. Handwritten would be a nice touch, but just here you go, baby girl. Check your bank account. If he just, sign the president, and I would be all like a flutter, and I'd run and I'd check my bank account. I'd see $1,400, and I'd just say, "Thank you, Daddy." I mean, is that what all this? We don't need all this.
We don't need to gussy this up. You're the sugar daddy. Just I'll give you what I'm going to give you. You give me what you're going to give you, and we don't need to make any bones about it.
That is it.
The pun, I guess.
That's it. Well, you never know.
All right, I'm doing doing all the housekeeping here at the beginning, getting everything all posted everywhere it has to get posted, and let me save this here. And we will get started with everything here in just a moment. I'll give you guys some time.
We haven't even started yet. We're letting you get your shit together so you can keep up with us.
Exactly correct.
We're going to be flying through some neo-reactionary reading rainbow today.
For
all you neo-reactionaries out there who aren't me, certainly, because I would never describe myself as anything that starts with neo or ends in reactionary, and certainly something that begins with neo and ends in reactionary only.
I'm glad that you made that clear.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Let me get this tweeted out. We're going to tweet out a link. Give all the people out there on the Twitters let them know that we are live now. Get some of you live folks in here.
That's right. Meanwhile, I'll be seeing what this bank account look. Ooh. Oh boy. Oh, I hope it hasn't hit yet. Let's say that.
You're hoping that this is the before the stimulus and not after the stimulus.
It's coming. Yeah. It's on its way. I just need it. It's on its way.
Man, I have been. Jesus. I was telling you, we had a very interesting in the supporting listeners group just before we went live. We had a very, very interesting conversation where we discussed certain things that Mr. Yarvin, Mr. Moldbug is a fan of, that are things that are not very socially appropriate to describe yourself as being a fan of, and we were discussing how we are also fans of said thing. And this is one of those that YouTube will definitely definitely highlight, and I would expect to get a knock on the door by men in suits if we actually put that stuff out there live. But suffice it to say that well, I'll just say this. I've said this live before on Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason, so I have no problem saying it here, that every society in history has had some form of slavery, and we have a form of slavery today. We have multiple different forms. Prison is slavery, is a form of slavery, and the 13th Amendment, you can just do this whole thing with the 13th Amendment, that it didn't abolish slavery, that slavery wasn't abolished then, and that it was just, they changed the definition, the legal definition of slavery, and made it so that the representatives of the federal government are the only people who are legally allowed to enslave people. However, just because you change definitions doesn't mean that the dynamic or that the phenomenon goes away. And if something is an inevitability, then there has to be good forms of it and bad forms of it. And so, in a sense, I think that everyone is actually pro this thing, pro that term, but they just don't quite realize it. They don't acknowledge it. Student loans are a form of that. That's what we were talking about just beforehand. And people will kind of, they'll accept that, but it's not real. It's not real communism. It's not real word. They so they'll kind of twist themselves into pretzels to say, oh well, it's actually different because you have choice. You get to choose things. But it's like slaves in the past were able to choose things. Not everything was dictated for them. So you can change the nature of the things that are chosen, but retain the nature of the relationship. So what's happened now is, as we're discussing, is that the institutions have kind of they've taken the slavery relationship and they've adjusted it, and they've made it so that instead of the slaver having a direct one-to-one interaction with the slave, now the institution has a depersonalized interaction with you. And there's an agreement. So like the employment institutions have an agreement with the universities. The universities say, we will get them to sign themselves into slavery, and we'll initiate the relationship with them. And as soon as we're finished with them, then they will obligate themselves to you. And you will provide for them. You'll be responsible for them. If they don't behave appropriately, then you will disconnect them from their ability to support themselves. So you'll dictate their behavior. You'll be the one who speaks for them, and who provides for them. But the great thing is that now those institutions, they don't even have to provide room and board. They don't have to give their subjects a place to sleep or anything. They just have to give them the money and let them go do it themselves. So it's made the slavery relationship much more hands off for the enslaving institutions, and they just have to let the people put themselves into slavery, and then they'll own them for the rest of their lives, and the whole time the people will think that they're free. But that doesn't remove the fact that it is still a form of slavery, and people are encouraged to go into it. You are seen as less than. You get less status if you haven't entered yourself into that form of slavery. And I would not say that I am pro word. any more than anyone else. I just think that there are much better forms of it, and historically we've seen that those much better forms can proliferate, and you can have an incredibly healthy society with those sorts of arrangements. But once you take the word and you apply it to only a very specific narrow form of that sort of relationship, then you lose that other relationship. It doesn't exist. Like we don't have a conceptualization for it because we don't have a word to apply to it. So the meaning kind of drifts away from us. So yeah, I guess that's that was the little rant I had just off the top of my head about that subject.
Yeah. Did we have ever a code word for that word that we're not using?
I was trying to think of that, but I couldn't.
I thought the shaved ice. No.
Oh yeah. That's what it was. Shaved ice. Yeah. Shaved ice.
Yeah.
Yep.
Was it, or did I just make that up and it sounded?
No. That was it. That was it.
Shaved ice. All right. Yeah. You see a lot of people walking around today that have a real shaved ice mentality about them. You know what I mean? Independent of other people who would just find themselves, like in a situation that would be where that relationship would make sense. Because I like. For me right now, sign me up. Maybe I don't know. I don't.
Yeah, that's what I said before we got started. I said that in me advocating for that sort of relationship to exist in society, the shaved ice relationship, I'm not like people might say that I'm saying, oh well, yeah, I would be the one that's in shaved icing other people. And I don't know that to be the case. I told Steven, I was like, there's at least a time in my life where there's no question at all that I would have
a sliver of ice.
Put myself straight into that kind of relationship. Because I had I had nothing to, I was completely lost, had no idea where I was going, what I was doing, had no meaning, had no purpose, and was struggling to provide for myself. And if someone had come to me and they would have said, I will provide you, I will take care of you, I'll protect you, I'll provide for all of your needs, your meals, your, whatever, I'll give you a place to live. But in return, I'm going to need you to obligate yourself to me. And for X amount of, maybe the rest of your life, I don't know. It depends on the arrangement. And I would have gladly put myself into that relationship at that point.
There's a lot of young women who are looking for on different apps and such for shaved ice relationships effectively.
Very much so.
Not all shaved ice looks the same.
That's funny. There's a on BAP Twitter, BAP being Bronze Age pervert.
Yes.
On BAP Twitter today, there was a thing going around being discussed. This chick was doing a live stream of some type, sitting at a library, I think, and she was 18. And this guy came up to her, and I kind of started hitting on her. He said, so he came up and he was like pointing to the chair at her table, and he was like, "Is this taken?" And she was like, no, go ahead, you can have it. And so he sat down there, and so she's like, what are you doing? Why are you sitting here? And he kind of like tries to like start a conversation. He's like, hey, so what's your name? I just saw you over here and I wanted to come over and, hang out over here and see what's going on. And so he was really awkward about it. Kind of, he didn't really have any game. And she was very like completely frozen and super awkward and couldn't even carry on a conversation with him. So it made it even worse. And so he finally just kind of gets up and is like, okay, sorry. And, walks away, and she's like freaking out. And the whole thing has gone viral, and there's people that are just talking about how like these guys like have the audacity to think they can just walk up and start talking to a girl. And it's like these people like literally do not want the human race to continue to persist. And the thought that occurred to me was, I was like, this is what dating apps have done. Because of dating apps now, it's considered a faux pas to approach someone in public. It all has to be done through the internet. So it's Tinder culture that is actively, aggressively policing Tinder's corporate interests, but it's masquerading as social justice. The future is for the bulk of humanity. The future is very, very dark. It's gonna be really gnarly. Just the complete collapse in fertility, and people that are just like the worst, most incapable human beings in human history having children, and the way that those children are going to grow up, and the type of world that they're going to create. For a large swath of humanity, the future is dark. But for a small segment of humanity, the people who still get it, who are still who are tied into their traditions, to their ancient traditions, and connected to them, and who have strong purpose and create strong families and have lots of kids, that whole thing, like those people are going to absolutely control the future. They're going to control the world. The world is going to be their oyster, because the world, reality responds to you when you operate within its constraints, within its rules. If you operate according to the natural law, you will be rewarded. And that is the natural law, to respect the traditions of your ancestors, to act in accordance with them, to number one, to provide for yourself, to look out for yourself, and then to find a mate, and then start a family and build that family and train up your kids in the ways of the Lord. Like that's the recipe. That's the natural calling of man. So those who follow that, they're going to own the future.
And cheers to them.
Absolutely. Carlos said, marriage is a voluntary ball and chain, but I like my slave master. She's cool as shit. We party hard all the time. Chingos have fun. And I mentioned that the other day when I had that kind of that squabble with Vin Armani, when I was talking about the law, like love and the law and their relationship to each other, and that human beings are born into slavery. We are born enslaved by our obligations to other people, to our parents, to our siblings, to our communities, to God, to our spouse. We are always bound by those obligations. We're never free from them. Freedom is the way that people use freedom is actually not even a good thing. You don't, like, freedom is cast as this like free of obligations to anyone, and you can do whatever you want. There's nothing that's good or noble or moral about that. We're defined by our obligations. We're born into them. And if you fulfill your obligations, then you'll be given more. And the more obligations that you fulfill, the more rewarded you will be, the more successful you will be. So freedom is found through enslaving yourself to your obligations and being true to them and continually fulfilling them. That's where you get true freedom, and that would be liberty. Liberty is when you have fulfilled all of your obligations, when you have provided max value to the rest of the world, and there is no obligation that's too much for you to overcome. That's what liberty is. But it starts with you. It starts with you and your responsibility. And the rights, your rights are the right to be rewarded for fulfilling your obligations. That's what a human right is. Once you've fulfilled your obligations, you'll naturally get the reward for it. And then that's what you can call your rights. But you don't get rights if you haven't fulfilled your responsibilities. The responsibilities have to come first. Anyways, so let's real quick. I want to just before we get into the actual reading of the chapter 4 of Patchwork, Mencius Moldbug's series on his it's a political system for the 21st century. Before we do that, I just wanted to run through a little Twitter thread that I tweeted this morning as I was out. One of my favorite times of the day is to go out walking in the morning. With at least I used to do it with just my dog, and then once my son was born 7.5 months ago, now he comes out with us too, and it's just the three of us boys walking around for probably an hour and a half or so every morning, pushing Eastwood in his stroller, and he usually falls asleep after a little bit, and I just kind of walk and think, and sometimes I'll listen to something, or I'll just have my phone out and I'll read something as I'm walking along, and so some juices kind of got flowing, and I had a sequence of thoughts that I tweeted out, and it ties into what I was just saying, and then it also it fits with the overall message of the show, like what it means to be king-pilled, and how a king-pilled person would live. So I'll just read through it here, and I'll try to get through this as fast as I can, just so we have as much time as we can to get through through this piece. So I said, everyone in America has access to the resources they need to be healthy, successful, and prosperous. And that's something that typically right-wingers or conservatives will agree with that, or libertarians. They'll agree with that, and they'll say, yeah, everyone has access to the resources they need to be healthy, successful, and prosperous. It's just that people don't know it. People don't understand it. On the other hand, progressive left-wing types would immediately get upset about me saying that everyone in America has access to the resources that they need to be healthy, successful, and prosperous. So I said, not everyone has access to the knowledge they need to access those resources. Half the country points out the former and ignores the latter. The other half does the opposite. So right-wingers, the right-wing half of the country, they'll point out that everyone in America has access to the resources that they need to be healthy, successful, and prosperous. Anyone you could, like, the world is your oyster if you want it to be. Anyone can use the internet to do whatever they want, there's the ability to travel at far cheaper and faster ways than any time in history. There's all manner of technology to make life easy and to scale your efforts to provide for yourself a life that's as good or better than any life anyone has ever had. But then the left side of the country will say no, these people are born into they're born into all these different oppressive situations, and structure and hierarchy is all oppressive, and it's what holds us back from being truly free and healthy, and yada yada yada. But to a degree, I think both sides are right, because what the left side of the country is at least intuitively sensing is that having access to something doesn't matter if you don't know you have access to it, or if you don't know how to use it. You don't know what to do with it once it's been given to you. So when the right side of the country just says, "Oh, you've got all the resources out there. Go, take care of yourself. It's easy." You're missing the fact that, number one, that's just a really poor form of communication, and it's lacking in empathy. But you're not going to get people to respond to you if you have that attitude to them, because they've got a genuine gripe. There's a genuine gripe that they have. That there's a constrained nature of knowledge, and the way that our culture has evolved and developed, it's created a priesthood that has all of the secret knowledge from the oracles of the gods, and then everybody else. And people are being actively trained in ways that harm them. So if they've been actively trained in a way that harms them, and they are recognizing it, they may not be able to identify it correctly, but they're recognizing it. If you want them to see the world from your perspective, the best thing to do is to be empathetic to them and say that like, I understand why you feel that way. I understand why you feel like everything is stacked against you, and it's difficult to get ahead, and you just can't do anything because you've been conditioned to think that way about yourself. You've been conditioned into mental slavery, and here's what I will do to help you. Here's how I will help you out of this situation. And they'll often, sometimes people will have that instinct, and then they're just very awkward about it. And so it comes off as really patronizing and condescending. But it starts with empathy. It starts with you having the empathy to recognize that. But let me continue the thread. I said, if you want to make people easy to control, you must control their access to knowledge. You have to create their world for them. Humans transfer knowledge transgenerationally by embedding it in symbols, traditions, and rituals. The best way to control people's knowledge is by disassociating them from their traditions and rituals and destroying or otherwise confusing the meaning of their important cultural symbols. Then there's this thing called Whig history, or Whig historiography, which is basically the belief that time is linear, and we're proceeding ever forward into the future and progress, and everything's getting better and better all the time. Like that sentiment is relatively new in world history, and it's a product of the Whigs, the progressives of the 16th, 17th, 18th century. So our friend of the show, Aaron McIntyre, tweeted, someone had tweeted, if the arch of the moral universe always bends toward justice, then evolution and morality are aligned. And he said Whig history and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. So I just quote tweeted that, and I said, Whig historiography asserts that the story of humanity is a tale of linear progress toward ever more enlightenment, freedom, intelligence, and prosperity. Within this frame, new is, by definition, better than old. Change is progress. Progress is good. Ergo, change is good. Once the prince of this earth, through his human representatives, collectively known as they, successfully framed the past as evil, backwards, and uncultured, they laid the foundation for the endarkening of the postmodernized mind. The traditions of our ancestors, by definition, contain the adaptive truths derived through the collective experience of the history of mankind. See the Lindy effect. The Lindy effect basically states that if something has existed for a long time, then it's very likely that it will continue to exist for a long time, because just the nature of evolution and natural selection and adaptiveness just by its very nature, the things that are the most adapted are the things that are going to last a long time. And if they've lasted a long time, then they have the traits that are necessary to last for a long time more. And that's referred to as something being Lindy. So basically, the idea is to be skeptical and suspicious of anything new, because new things are unproven, but old things are very well proven, and you know much better whether you can depend upon them or rely upon them. So I said, nothing is more insidiously dangerous and antisocial than encouraging a man to hold contempt for his ancestors. That's a form of, if you're encouraging you to hold contempt for your ancestors, is a form of psychological torment. By attempting to have someone hold contempt for their ancestors, you're attempting to cut them away from their foundation, to destroy what makes them, to destroy their identity in essence, and to really remove their humanity altogether, because that's what their identity is, their humanity. So I said, this is why a key part of winning a war has always involved forcing one's conquests to renounce their religion and spit upon the graves of their ancestors. If I can separate you from your traditions, I will own you. Traditions are the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and why we're here and what we do. We only understand ourselves by placing our lives into the context of a narrative. This is why they say that if you're struggling with a decision to make and you don't know what to do, think of yourself as being a character in a movie. And what would your character in that movie do when faced with the decision that you're faced with? And typically, if you frame it that way, if you put that, if you look at it from that perspective, it can give you a lot of clarity. It's happened for me before, where it just kind of like the answer just comes to me. I'm like, well, obviously, character Matt in this movie would do this thing. That's very obviously in accordance with who he is and with his values. So I'm going to do that. It's just the way that we're wired. We're wired to see ourselves as the hero of our own story and the hero of a movie. Without the narrative, we have no identity. Without an identity, we have no meaning. Without meaning, we have no purpose. Without purpose, we are nothing. Political conquest follows ideological conquest. Ideological conquest precludes military conquest. So if I can defeat you, if my ideology can defeat your ideology, then I don't need to invoke my military, because it's just the nature of once my ideology has won, I don't even need to fight you anymore, because you'll just surrender to me. You'll concede to me. You'll concede the field. So once your religion is destroyed, your Second Amendment means nothing. You will do what you're told. America has been conquered. While everyone was focused on the political arena, her conquerors were winning all the battles in the only war that actually mattered, the spiritual war for her soul. You can't save America, but you can build whatever replaces her. If you want to know how to move forward into the future, look back to the past. All the knowledge you need is already out there. History didn't start in 1776. One idea that I enjoy, that was the end of the thread, one idea that I enjoy is thinking about how groups of people are standalone entities in and of themselves. So you have like one person is an entity, and then a group of 5 people is its own entity. It will have distinct behaviors and characteristics and even like a consciousness that the one person doesn't have, and that is different from the consciousness of each of the 5 people. The 5 people together will have its own consciousness, and this scales and continues to be that way. So in a very real sense, a nation or a country, a group of people at that scale can have its own consciousness and be almost like its own standalone being in a sense. And I think that's something that ancient people really understood this. They knew this intuitively, and it's been kind of dismissed. It's evolved away from us as we've modernized. But as modern scientists have started studying consciousness, they're coming right back around to this understanding. If you want, there's a really good conversation that I started listening to. Jonathan Pajot, on his channel, he was talking to Father Stephen DeYoung about hope for the future and the religion of the apostles. Very, very strongly recommend it. I'll put it in the show notes after the show here today, so you guys can watch it if you'd like to. Jonathan Pageau is just one of the most brilliant people alive, and this guy he's talking to is equally brilliant. They talked about this kind of thing, and then they discuss a lot about the spiritual perspectives or the supernatural understandings of the apostles and people around the time of Christ, just before, just after. It was a very, very interesting conversation. But anyways, okay. Stephen, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Okay. So let me check the comments here. Oh, Popular Liberty is in here. All right, what's up, guys? So, real quick, if this is the first time you've ever watched the show, we're doing a series right now. We're doing a live reading series going through different blog posts from Mitch's Moldbug. His blog's called Unqualified Reservations, and if you haven't read it before, you must. It's some of the best political writing that you'll ever see. And he's a bit of an acquired taste. A lot of people find him to be too wordy. I see his writing as like a performance art, that he could just deliver the ideas to you, but he puts them together in a kind of like in an art form, almost like a more narrative form that makes them stick for me even more. And I just really enjoy watching, or I enjoy reading it in the same sense that I would enjoy, like, someone could just tell me a story, or they could perform the story for me, and I would enjoy the performance more than just the basic retelling. So so we're reading through that right now. This isn't all that we do here at King Pilled. We do normal conversations as well. So I encourage you guys to subscribe, do us a favor, like this video, and share it with someone. I think that this is I've heard from a lot of people. I had the idea that this seemed like this would be a fun way to consume Moldbug's content, to do sort of like an audiobook, which is part of the reason why I thought of this, because there's very few ways of consuming Moldbug via audio. And I don't really have time to sit and read. I'm always moving. I'm always going somewhere. So I do audiobooks. And when I wanted to read Moldbug, I realized there was very few sources for it. So this way you get to hear it, for those of you who are like me, who prefer to listen to your content. But also, we just kind of make it our own a little bit here, and we inject our comments and stuff as we go. And if you've never read Moldbug, he has a lot of embedded links where he will just kind of reference or hint to something and just put a link under what he's writing, so that you go click that and you realize what he was referring to. But if you're just reading it through, you might not get what he's referencing. So I'll just go down those rabbit holes so people can so you get the full experience of what he's talking about.
And that was in contrast to my initial idea, which was that if we had an episode where I would be sitting and reading, Matthew would be sitting and reading, we'd say 1, 2, 3, go, and then we would just kind of read silently and then react. So you might just you could read along if you wanted to, but
then it's just long stretches of silence.
And no, I mean, just like we'll act it out just for a quick second, if I may. Pretend you're reading or whatever. Huh, that's interesting. Did you get to the part about not yet?
No, not yet. No. I'm okay. You're a paragraph ahead of me.
Okay. All right, let me know.
Oh yeah. That's great.
It's just kind of like a library podcast vibe, and the fans. Just read along and I'm on my commute. Oh, you're on your commute. I mean, how long have smartphones been around? Text and drive, you pussy. Like, I mean, have you not evolved like peripheral vision? Like, it's just like let's all be very honest. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to be living in Star Trek pretty soon. So this uncomfortable time where the self-driving cars are just sort of until they really get here and get wired in.
They do like that automatic braking and stuff, so you don't even have to have that greater reaction time. Yeah,
it's you're fine. You're fine. No one has ever gotten into a car accident from texting and driving or reading and driving. That is a myth perpetuated by Elon Musk. I don't know. But anyway, we're doing this thing where Matthew reads it out loud, and I guess that works too. So
yeah. Here we are. I'm sorry we didn't decide to go the way that you wanted. I hope you can live with it.
So what you can do you know, if since Matthew's kind enough to sit back and read these for you out loud, is just pop a CBD gummy and just kind of get your get in the right mind space to listen to this sort of out of the box thinking.
And if you don't have a source for those CBD gummies, or even if you do have a source for those CBD gummies, I guarantee you that it's not as good as ours.
Punk ass source. Your source fucking sucks unless it's ours.
Your source is bad. Yep. You need some gummies, some CBD gummies, or CBD soft gels, or even maybe like a CBD salve or a tincture. Whatever floats your boat. There's even multiple flavors of gummies. What we're talking about is, of course, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Our friends from Paloma Verde over with Carlos and Vanessa, they've got a very good thing going on. They just started a new website. It looks fantastic. It's very easy to use. And with each order that you get a little, at least for now, they're doing a little handwritten note from them thanking you. It's a very nice personal touch. And I imagine they're not going to be able to do that for long because they are blowing up, and you can hear them on all sorts of different podcasts now. Green Paloma is spelled PALOMAVERDE CBD.com. You can use promo code KING for 25% off any order over $75. And let them know that you came from us. I keep getting messages from Carlos where he's giving me the heads up that we just had another purchase. So it's great to hear you guys are supporting this show and supporting Carlos and Vanessa and getting some amazing CBD products in the process. I started taking the soft gels every night. The last order that I did their unregistered pack. Shout out Thad Russell with the Unregistered podcast. I did their unregistered pack, which is the CBD gummies. I got the strawberry lemonade and the soft gels and the tincture. And so I've been taking the soft gels before I go to sleep at night, and this is the best sleep that I've ever had in my life, hands down. As far back as I can remember, I haven't slept this well. Vivid dreams, wake up refreshed every day, and it's good because life is incredibly hectic and exhausting right now. So big shout out to Carlos and Vanessa at Paloma Verde. Go and get yourself some goodies. Popular Liberty says, how much sleep have you been getting lately? Well, since I just said how many sleep, that should probably give you an idea of how much. It actually hasn't been too bad. I've been getting more sleep than Amy, which is kind of typical because she stays there with the little man. I would gladly take him occasionally at night to give her a break, but I don't have the proper equipment, and so he would not accept my attempts to soothe him when he wakes up in the middle of the night. So Amy does a great job. She's a great mom. And he adores his mama and she adores him, and it's a beautiful thing to see. So I tend to get decent sleep, but the last couple of weeks has been just absolutely flat out. We got our 2 cars sold. There are 2 leases, and we just made an ungodly amount of positive equity all of a sudden because the used car market has gone crazy. And so we got those taken in and sold to CarMax yesterday. And walked out an hour and a half, 2 hours later with checks, went and deposited them right away. Couldn't have been an easier process. So shout out to our other sponsor, CarMax. And and then I'm working on getting this new pickup truck and working through a broker, and the market is insane. There's very few options left, and it's difficult to negotiate. And then I've got to get a tonneau cover. We've had rental cars. I went over to Enterprise today, returned the rental car to Avis. We had to get a new one. Went over to Enterprise, walked 10 minutes in Southern California heat over to the Enterprise, and then realized that I had Amy's credit card instead of mine. And then for a debit card, to use a debit card at Enterprise, you have to have 2 different like bills. Like you have to show up with like an electric bill and your mortgage bill or something. Anyways, so they were kind enough to drive me home so Amy could go over there and use her credit card. Anyways, long story short, I'm tired.
Carlos, that's great. You got the Thad Russell pack, but what about the Milky King pack? For the young gentlemen to take care of their thighs.
Yeah, the Milky King pack. There you go, CarMax. Them's the folks. Again, if you guys have a car that you've even remotely considered selling or replacing, or even something that you haven't necessarily, but you could use a few extra $1,000, use CarMax's online trade or online selling option. Just go there, get a quick appraisal, and if it's worth it to you, go in and get it. And it's still possible to get decent cars, decent new ones, but you might have to do a little extra work. But this is the highest that you'll ever see the residual value on any of your cars. Okay, let's get started on Patchwork. It is now 40 minutes in. Anybody who's just clicked on this just to watch, just for Patchwork, like they've never listened to us before, they just clicked this just for Patchwork. Yeah.
Fuck you. Fuck you. You listen to us.
If you like the fact that this is our response to you, then welcome aboard. You're our people.
We get to that Curtis Yarvin jerk off whenever we fucking damn well please. We can be wordy too.
That's right.
Did you turn into hear a brilliant political philosopher, and then you dare ask questions about why we're talking to you about CarMax? You go straight to
exactly. Okay, let us get started. This is the last chapter of the Patchwork series. Patchwork, a political system for the 21st century. Chapter 4, a reactionary theory of world peace. Mentions Moldbug, December 3, 2008, the day before my birthday. How kind. Okay. You are, or unqualified reservations, is hardly the first to propose a theory of world peace. So why bother? What could possibly be new? History records quite a few previous attempts at world peace, some of which even worked pretty well in practice. For example, one was called the Roman Empire. Another was called the Qing Dynasty. I don't know if that's how you pronounce Qing. The Qing, King, whatever. A third was called the British Empire. All three being extinct and therefore not entirely successful. But there's no denying that in their day they turned out quite a bit of peace. But the world of 2008 has its own theory of world peace, which everyone believes as usual. This theory, which needless to say I think is utter crap, owes most of its arguments to Kant's essay on perpetual peace. In practice, it more deserves its most parochial name, Pax Americana. For an amusing personal history of the mapping from Kant to Turtle Bay, try my fellow Brown alumnus, Michael Susan, and he links to Michael Susan's Backstabbing for Beginners, a crash course in international diplomacy. We will go into this whole strange theory of the Pax Americana in just a bit, but our first question has to be, does this Pax Americana work? Well, in some ways, yes. The 2008 that history sent us to contains less carnage, surely, than many other 2008s which chance might have produced. On the other hand, when I open my friendly local newspaper, I am seldom greeted with pictures of smiling, happy children. I feel, dear reader, that we could do better. And more importantly, my general impression is not that this system, this Pax Americana, is getting better over time. I'm not an old man, but I was not born yesterday, and I was listening to the BBC and reading the IHT and The Economist well before I had hair in my pits, and my general feeling is that across history, as I have seen it, basically since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the world order that was created in 1945 has not been becoming a more and more cohesive, harmonious, efficient, or effective operation. I think it is quite incontestable that the entire planet, in 2008, is safe for democracy. Indeed, it is clearly safe for nothing but. Yet I notice no particular absence of conflict, armed or otherwise, nor anything like a decrease. Rather the contrary, actually. This, to me, spells entropy. What peace we have is mostly stable, but it is not perfectly stable. Whatever disorder it has seems good at escalating itself. Since, as a good citizen, you are familiar with the theory of global warming, you are familiar with what is needed to take slowly rising curves and project them into the late 21st century. Citizen, if I share your concern for the gaseous composition of the atmosphere, can you please share my concern for the breakdown of the thin membrane that distinguishes our world from Jimmy Cliff's? Mango season bad this year. And what he's referencing is The Harder They Come, a 1972 Jamaican crime film directed by Perry Henzell and co-written by Trevor D. Rohn and starring Jimmy Cliff. The film was most famous for its reggae soundtrack that is said to have brought reggae to the world. Of course, Curtis Yarvin is familiar with an obscure Jamaican crime film that brought reggae to the world. So our theory of peace is a little different. It is reactionary rather than progressive, which means that it is designed to work with hominids not as they should be, angels without wings, but as they are, bipedal land apes. Progressive thinkers throughout history differ wildly on the means by which said land apes can be converted into angels, philosophers, or ideally, angelic philosophers. much as no two alchemists agree on how to synthesize gold. For instance, Kant, taking the popular null hypothesis or sugar pill strategy, roots his claim for the inherent peaceability of republican government in the following logic. Quoting Kant, "Now the Republican Constitution, apart from the soundness of its origin, since it arose from the pure source of the concept of right, has also the prospect of attaining the desired result, namely, perpetual peace. And the reason is this. If, as must be so under this Constitution, the consent of the subjects is required to determine whether there shall be war or not, nothing is more natural than that they should weigh the matter well before undertaking such a bad business. For in decreeing war, they would of necessity be resolving to bring down the miseries of war upon their country. This implies they must fight themselves. They must hand over the costs of the war out of their own property. They must do their poor best to make good the devastation which it leaves behind. And finally, as a crowning ill, they have to accept a burden of debt which will embitter even peace itself, and which they can never pay off on account of the new wars which are always impending." In other words, Kant is saying that that in a democracy, people will not tolerate war because it will cost them so much. His naivete is charming and sweet, but anyways. On the other hand, in a government where the subject is not a citizen holding a vote, i.e. in a constitution which is not republican, the plunging into war is the least serious thing in the world. For the ruler is not a citizen, but the owner of the state, and does not lose a whit by the war, while he goes on enjoying the delights of his table or sport, or of his pleasure palaces and gala days. He can therefore decide on war for the most trifling reasons, as if it were a kind of pleasure party." End quote. In other words, Kant is assuming that since voters are generally reasonable people, they will vote for reasonable governments that will act reasonably and only undertake reasonable wars. The modern reader reading this must quickly remind herself that Immanuel Kant was not a fool. In 1795, the world's experience with democracy, a word Kant, like most everyone at the time, considered a slur. In Perpetual Peace, he goes to great, hilariously spurious lengths to distinguish democracy from his beloved republicanism, was minimal. So, taking out the parenthetical about Kant trying to distance himself from democracy, that sentence said, in 1795, the world's experience with democracy was minimal. The French Revolution could be dismissed as an aberration, and the follies of the late colonies in the Articles of Confederation period was no doubt no better known in Königsberg in 1795 than to us today. So it was easy for Kant to make the fatal assumption that the people, in their new capacity as rulers, would display the same common sense in considering problems of government as they had when no one cared what they thought. Kant was biased in his matter by the success of England, whose glory at the time was attributed on the continent to its constitution's new democratic elements, rather than its corrupt medieval survivals, which turned out to actually be the glue that held the Whig aristocracy together. If Kant could see the results of the reform bills of 1832 and 1867, he might well sing a different tune. The reform bills were a series of proposals to reform voting in the British Parliament. These include the Reform Acts of 1832, 1867, and 1884. The bills reformed voting by increasing the electorate for the House of Commons and removing certain inequalities in representation. The Bill of 1832 disfranchised many boroughs, which enjoyed undue representation, and increased that of the large towns, at the same time extending the franchise, and was put through by the Whigs. The Bill of 1867 was passed by the Conservatives under the urging of the Liberals, while that of 1882 was introduced by the Liberals and passed in 1884. These latter two bills provided for a more democratic representation. Kant reasons. People are generally reasonable, as they are, except when unreasonable. If you entrust them with the power of government, you create an easy exploitation target for an oligarchy that controls the state by directing the opinions of the people. Such oligarchies come in two categories: conscious cults and conspiracies, in which at least some top echelons of believers is insincere and consciously malicious, and true religions in which everyone can be sincere. The former are bad, and the latter are worse, and the most effective. Ours is the modern iteration of mainline or ecumenical Protestantism. I call it universalism. See, for example, Charter for Compassion for a brutal, syrupy dose. And he links to the Charter for Compassion website. And then when he said ours is the modern iteration of mainline, okay, he just linked to mainline Protestant and ecumenism on Wikipedia. And such religions, which may be polytheistic, monotheistic, or atheistic, have no reason at all to maintain the reasonableness of the minds they control, at least on the subject of government. In fact, the parasite must be able to profit at the expense of the host. It must at least convince the host to fund the parasite and ban or discredit its competitors. Thus, Kant's whole argument about self-interest is void and can be discarded, destroying his theory of Republican virtue and thus his entire preposterous edifice of peace. An edifice that has worked basically like ass. Again, experience confirms logic. Empirically, the expected outcome of a Kantian Republican federation is that either A, the federation becomes a megastate of its own, which is, of course, ideal because bigger is always better. B, the federation breaks in half and creates a massive civil war, in which the good guys always win. Or C, the federation never has any real existence and quickly becomes at best a joke, at worst a festering glob of pompous, corrupt sinecures, but still a symbol of human progress and unity. Thankfully, the result of the last two attempts has been C1 and C2, which would be the Federation never has any real existence and quickly becomes at best a joke, so it's been that, and it's also been, at worst, a festering glob of pompous, corrupt sinecures, but still a symbol of human progress and unity. Do we need to pull the lever again? No, I think not. But the basic armature of Kant's argument is solid, and we will reuse it. The argument is that warfare is not a policy to which a responsible sovereign will resort without good reason. Kant's fallacy is in equating republican with responsible, and lacking the imagination to see that popular government has the power to produce far more irresponsible leadership than the classical monarchies he knew, with their little family spats and mild fancy dress wars. The world of Frederick the Great and Louis XV, while Kant was no doubt a keen judge of its imperfections, exhibited a quality of order which we of the Pax Americana can only imagine. He's saying basically that the world of Frederick the Great and Louis XV, that and he's saying that Kant was very critical of it and was aware of all the different imperfections with it, and so there he thought it was bad. But if he had seen the actual consequences of what he was proposing, he would have realized that for its foibles, it was much better than the alternative. What would Paris be if the regime that created Versailles had the technology of 2008? A kind of supernova. A place as far above Paris today as Paris today is above Kinshasa. Certainly the center of the world, even if you plopped it down in Siberia. Why don't we have this now? How did things come to such a pass? Before we get into reactionary world peace, let's try and figure out this Pax Americana. Kant had no trouble in describing the obvious principle its name suggests. Quoting Kant again, nevertheless, it is the desire of every state, or of its ruler, to attain to a permanent condition of peace in this very way. That is to say, by subjecting the whole world as far as possible to its sway. End quote. Amen. The great fraud of our current international community is its preposterous disguise as a Kantian federation of equals. In reality, the international community is Washington and her clients. At least when it is in proper working order. It sometimes approaches such order, but it never seems to quite reach it. The agencies in foreign capitals, which we call governments, are fascinating entities in many ways. Each is different, but in general what they are is clear. There is no accepted English term for the relationship, although client or even puppet state is close. And then he links to, there's a footnote here. It says, in an open letter to open-minded progressives, Moldbug introduces the term Muppet state to describe this sort of relationship, quoting him from Open Letter to Open-Minded Progressives. A Muppet state is not quite a puppet state. It delivers a far more lifelike impression of individual identity. It has not just an invisible hand supporting it from below, but invisible strings pulling it from above. In fact, Muppet states often appear quite hostile to their masters. There are a variety of reasons for this. One is internal conflict within the master state, which we'll get to in a bit, but the simplest is just camouflage. I think that's a really, really great observation. The fact that a Muppet state can actually be hostile to the state that is its master. And part of that is because the state that is its master might have internal conflict, but the other part is that it's just good camouflage. You know, nobody's going to accuse Iran of being a puppet state of Washington because, oh, well, look, they're always trying to be at war. They're always against each other. But the reality is that Iran is basically a Muppet state of Washington. Okay, we do see something like sovereignty in the post-communist world. Russia, China, plus the Iran, Syria, Venezuela axis. Russia and China treat each other as sovereigns, and they are clearly intent on preserving some of their sovereign independence, although the imbalanced financial relationships with the Western world that they find themselves in are clear no-nos. Nonetheless, they are generally quite submissive toward the U.S., an approach which is probably prudent. Iran, Syria, and Venezuela are in the position of perpetual hostility that Russia occupied in the heyday of the Cold War, one which is inarguably inconsistent with true sovereignty, since the hostile regimes are so dependent on the continuation of the conflict, but one which certainly separates them from the rest of America's sheep. As for the rest of these governments, in many ways, these agencies really do resemble actual sovereign authorities. This is certainly their formal status. However, if you were to describe them as locally staffed branches of the State Department, you would also be grasping at a truth. The official role of state is not state being the State Department. The official role of state is not supervisory, but advisory, a distinction we discuss in some detail below. Nonetheless, it is undeniable that the function of a U.S. mission to a non-U.S. country is not comparable to the function of a non-U.S. mission to the U.S. I'm quite confident that the French embassy, for example, expends very little effort on telling the U.S. how to reform its financial system. This is all very confusing. What exactly is the difference between supervising and advising? Is Washington supposed to be running the world, or isn't it? Please, allow me to explain. Perhaps you've wondered how a perspective that considers imperialism and American exceptionalism taboos, reminiscent of the Big H himself, can produce phrases such as, "The possible decline in America's power does not mean that the United States would not remain powerful. This country can and must continue to lead." So this is, he's got a bunch of links here. So Big H being Hitler. And then he's quoting from an opinion column, Gloom but Not Doom, in the New York Times. And it doesn't show who the author... Oh, it's an editorial here. And then... Okay, so this is one of the things that it's very easy to understand what he's talking about when you're reading it, but to read it out loud, it makes it harder to understand. So he was quoting the New York Times editorial, and he was also referencing Andrew Basovich's book, The Limits of Power, The End of American Exceptionalism. So basically the American empire ethos produces phrases like, it simultaneously thinks imperialism is bad and American exceptionalism are bad, but then it also says things like, the possible decline in America's power does not mean that the United States would not remain powerful. This country can and must continue to lead. Or, more gloriously, this being a quote from Obama's victory speech, quote, "And to all those watching tonight from beyond our shores, from parliaments and palaces to those who are huddled around radios in the forgotten corners of our world, our stories are singular, but our destiny is shared, and a new dawn of American leadership is at hand." He says Chauncey Depew would be proud. Is Washington supposed to be ruling the world? Is Washington supposed to be leading the world? Is there a difference between leading and ruling? If you replace lead with rule above, a new dawn of American rule is at hand, you definitely don't have a line that either the president or the Times could be imagined uttering. So there must be some difference. But what is it? Clearly, if America leads, its relationship with those it is leading must be anything but equal. Neither the Times nor President Obama will tell us that while America should lead Europe, Europe should also lead America. Not even such scoundrels can torture English so. Any unequal relationship between any two parties, be they sovereigns, colleagues, or family members, must involve some combination of two models of control. Call them authority and dependence. A holds authority over B if B must obey A's instructions. Authority is executive control, as practiced in the workplace, in the traditional family, and of course in the military chain of command. Recall from Chapter 3, the Latin translation, imperium. B is dependent on A if A is gratuitously assisting B. And why would A do that? The relationship is the ancient one of patronage, of course. A is the patron. B is the client. This is one of the oldest forms of alliance in the book. I'm pretty sure chimpanzees practice it. Note that in most cases, the two go together. For example, your relationship with your 13-year-old includes both A and B, authority and dependence. She eats your food. You tell her what to do. The analogy suggests the unusual nature of dependence without authority. Ordinarily, if A is rational, A will insist on authority along with the dependence. No authority, no gratuities. Can this break down with a 13-year-old? Absolutely, but a complete breakdown requires fairly bad parenting as well as, of course, a bad child. But what we see in the Pax Americana, at least its mainstream or Barackian form, not its renegade crypto-imperialist Bush-Hitler morph, is exactly that. For example, Pakistan is dependent on Washington, and yet Washington cannot say, get rid of Lashkar-e-Taiba and the like. Washington could certainly not say, clean up your streets, get rid of the madrasas, seal the border, etc., 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 and in general start behaving as if the Raj was back on. Because Pakistan is sovereign. At least it is supposed to be sovereign. Yet if the U.S. cut off the flow of dollars, Lord only knows what the country would turn into. Whatever that is, it surely has nothing to do with what Pakistan is now. The other day I was talking to a friend of mine, thoroughly westernized but with parents in the Pakistani middle class, and he was describing how in the cities of Pakistan there are many attractive colonial-era neighborhoods that, in the lives of those now living, have fallen into complete disrepair and become slums. Funnily enough, very similar phenomena can be observed in, say, Ohio. So why doesn't Washington simply tell it, obey or no more dollars? Well, the answer is not simple. The answer has to do with the internals of Washington, the structural conflict between Pentagon and state, the history of Pakistan and of the British Empire, etc., etc., etc. We could be at this for some time. But note, again, the analogy to the 13-year-old. Why won't your daughter obey? Why don't you make her? Well, it's complicated. It is always complicated. Suffice it to say that American citizens gain nothing at all from this bizarre pseudo-empire. It might be useful to have all these allies, perhaps, if we were in a war against somebody, and also if they would fight and stuff. Neither of these things seem to be true. We do trade with them, but this does not require us to manage their governments, or in fact care at all how they are managed internally. Conclusion. American foreign policy for the last 60 years has produced neither security nor anything else for Americans. Nor, I believe, has it been particularly good for the rest of the world, which would otherwise have to defend itself and behave responsibly as an independent sovereign. For Foggy Bottom, however, it has been a windfall. Every year it is paid more and more to supervise a giant squalling world of 13-year-olds who dress like hoes and bring guns to school, and the next 4 years promise to be especially rich. Remember, he wrote this in 2008, and there he links to an article from the New York Times, a hand-picked team for a sweeping shift in foreign policy, talking about the Obama foreign policy administration. Washington cannot actually administer its conquered territories, much less derive revenue from them. And their governments degrade because they are neither sovereign nor supervised. Their job is to implement policies designed at Harvard and approved in Washington. Except in countries with strong traditions of historical probity and state service, the civil servants steal. They have nothing else to do, and there is no prospect of the state becoming a genuine independent authority. What does Washington get out of this? Two things. One, the privilege of feeling like a big stud. Of course, this applies only to a few people who work inside the Beltway, or who are influential enough in policy studies that their policies actually get adopted. But contributing to actual policies that are actually adopted, even just in some ridiculous forgery of a country in nowhere Africa, is an unmistakable feeling. Not only does it provide employment, it makes one's gonads grow by at least a millimeter or two. Many will fight hard for this sensation. The relationship of dependency and advice is particularly pernicious. Dependency allows American universities to populate the top layers of all foreign institutions with their graduates, largely because those graduates have American connections and thus links to the baskets of dollars which fall out of the sky. But advice is not supervision. It does not want to be supervision, and it never will be supervision. If the American embassy tells a foreign government what to do, it can usually expect quite a bit of balking and recalcitrance. Absolute orders will generally be complied with, but will greatly increase the general recalcitrance level. Foreigners, or people too, like to have their own power and don't like to be ordered around. Moreover, the United States is not the British Empire. It is in the business of having clients, whom it pretends to be responsible for, and provides large quantities of often unwanted advice to. Ideally, when the advice is good, it is listened to, and when it is bad, it is ignored. But this can go the other way around as well. The State Department is not in the business of providing supervision and must constantly work hard to prevent the dysfunctional model of advice and dependency from actually turning into responsible authoritative supervision. This is especially problematic because the latter runs the risk of involving the Pentagon, that ancient enemy which happens to be full of people who just love giving orders. The threat that the international community will turn into the Arlington Redneck Empire, perhaps with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace replaced by the Eric Prince Foundation for World Domination, may not actually be a real one, but if you are the sort of person who needs to be kept up at night, it can probably keep you up. Okay, I need water. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
So he's going through the two things that Washington gets out of this relationship. One was the privilege of feeling like a big stud. Two, Americans care about foreign public opinion. I used to ask people why they were for Obama, and what I heard, often from people who didn't care at all about politics normally, was that he would improve America's image in the eyes of the world. It is generally a waste of time to engage anyone on why the eyes of the world should matter, or how exactly they got.
Do you remember that though? Do you remember living through that at all?
Yes,
that was
100%.
I could feel it just again and just running through me. God, was that annoying?
And then, it was like that was so important to so many people, and then he was immediately followed up with by Donald Trump. I mean, like, I can understand the agony that these people went through to finally get this just beautiful, safe, adorable man who just makes them feel so good in the cockles of their hearts. They just it's like their favorite daddy. They got the best daddy in the world to run their country that they get to identify with, and they even get social credit points because they're a white person who likes him. You know, that's just they were just it was pure nirvana for them. And then this fucking like Manhattan real estate guy comes barreling through their china shop, just like shitting all over them and flipping them off and grabbing his nuts at them, and they just had an absolute coronary.
God. No, just when you just like reading that little line and you put yourself back in that time frame, just the joy of everyone just gleefully saying, just like, you know, it's gonna, the eyes of the rest of the world, we're just gonna look so much better. They got rid of the Team America profuse vomiting GIF, but boy, is that applicable.
It is generally a waste of time to engage anyone on why the eyes of the world should matter, or how exactly they got to pointing in the direction that they generally point in. Here we must be thankful to the Wikipedians for the term meat puppet. To be quite frank, invading Albonia, replacing its government with Albonian dignitaries of a perspective congenial to oneself, and announcing that Albonia has joined the family of free nations is not a way to convert one's opinion, plus Albonia's opinion, into two opinions. At least rationally. But the democratic voter is always responsible to consensus. And the absurd concept of international public opinion, which since 1945 always, of course, just tracks the public opinion of the most fashionable people in the United States, persuades a fair number of voters. Thus, by shaping the opinions of people outside the U.S., one can influence votes inside it. What is that? Oh, Europeans. Is that the I don't think about you?
Yeah. I was just putting up there for a supplemental while you were reading. But yes, the Europeans. I feel bad for you and the Americans. I don't think about you at all.
Don Draper.
Oh God, it's so good.
This is just a fantastic point, though, the way that he's identifying that by shaping the opinions and the beliefs of people outside the American empire, you can influence what the people inside the American empire do and believe. We're all laughing at you now, haha. Who cares? Steven's got the good memes today. Okay, the people who do this work do not, of course, think in such Machiavellian terms, but their results benefit from the Machiavellian logic just the same. That is, people aren't necessarily deliberately crafting international public opinion for the explicit purpose of influencing and directing American public opinion, but it's having the effect just the same. This is the purpose of America's pseudo-empire of patronage, in which the money always flows outward and the Muhammad Attas flow only inward, to provide a large number of unnecessary jobs to America's ruling class, the smartest and most sophisticated people in the country, and those most able to obtain alternative employment. and also to gain the set of votes that are needed to keep the policy running, as well as to sustain other policies aligned with it. In short, like most of what Washington is today, a self-licking ice cream cone. But because of the multiple frauds essential to this forgery, Washington's sway is peculiarly insidious as compared to its Roman, Chinese, or British predecessors, who, when they ruled a conquered land, ruled it honestly, making no attempt to disguise the nature of the relationship. America's client states, especially outside the core European and Asian dominions, i.e., in the Third World, a term whose inventors did not predict its present connotations, deliver quality of government metrics that would have shocked any Roman procurator, Chinese mandarin, or British district commissioner. Even when these possessions are at peace, graft, banditry, and sheer incompetence are the rule rather than the exception. And peace is not always the rule. For example, were you surprised when, seeing the pictures on TV, you noticed that even in the old downtown of Bombay, a place chock full of beautiful Raj-era buildings like the Taj Hotel, the streets were full of garbage? Or do you think that this is because the local authorities are so thrifty and impoverished that they prefer to invest their few rupees on educating the poor? This is the current system of the world, a disaster, absurd in every detail. It lives, it works in a sense, it even is mostly peaceful, but it's held together by chewing gum, and I don't trust it to last another decade. Look, I said this about our financial system. Was I wrong? But anyway, as usual, I have spent most of this chapter berating what we have now because what we have now is so gigantic and fascinating. By comparison, my preferred approach, the reactionary theory of world peace, if you will, is simple to the point of stupidity. The reactionary theory of world peace states that peace is best defined as security. That's all. We're just equating two words. And we can add a third, order. Peace, security, and order are all the same thing. That's the theory. It even sounds cool, if not as cool as Brazil's Ordem Progresso, which is on the flag of Brazil. It says Ordem Progresso, which means order. Let's see here. It's derived from Auguste Comte's motto of positivism, where he says it in French, and it means love as a principle and order as the basis, progress as the goal. What use is this creepy-sounding triangle? Peace, security, and order. Doesn't this just sound like the motto of a 21st century secret police force? And it may well yet be. Here is one. Note that if you believe in peace, you believe that peace is an absolute good. It is not a Goldilocks good. No one believes that you can have not enough peace, just right peace, and too much peace. No one says, with St. Augustine, give me world peace, but not just yet. The more peace you have, the better. Concepts such as freedom are in the same class. And the quote from Augustine was, "O Lord, give me chastity, but do not give it yet." But if peace, security, and order are all the same thing, there must be equivalents of absolute peace, absolute security, and absolute order. Strangely enough, whatever word you exchange absolute for in these phrases either means nothing or still sounds creepy. Total security, for example, is not in any way an improvement. Suppose, for example, that John McCain had run for president on a platform of absolute order. As president, I will impose absolute order. No, I just can't see it happening. This is due to your democratic programming, which first and foremost defends democracy, the strategy of symbiont and parasite alike. The Democrat is not willing to equate peace with security and order. He does not like security and order because either total security or absolute order in the end conflicts with democracy. The peaceful reactionary world of Patchwork is a world populated entirely by rational, absolute sovereigns, states which are managed competently and coherently for financial benefit alone. This world can be created on a subset of the entire planet, of course, though then it needs plans for defending itself against the rest of said planet. Within Patchwork, peace, security, and order are most definitely the same thing. Of course, a realm is designed to maintain absolute or near absolute levels of internal security and order. Society within a Patchwork realm has none of the running sores of the democratic era. There are no slums or dirty streets, no gangs, and no politics. Japan or Singapore would be the closest analogies today, though both, of course, are quite imperfect. We can define a rational absolute sovereign, such as a Patchwork realm, as orderly. Such a sovereign is controlled centrally from a single point, by competent administration acting for a purely financial purpose. All its motivations come from its desire to produce return on equity. If predation is more profitable than cooperation, it will predate. If cooperation is more profitable, it will cooperate. Obviously, the goal is to design a framework in which cooperation is always more profitable. Note that all these criteria remain absolute. The administration cannot be too competent. Its purposes cannot be too neutral. Its responsiveness to the proprietors too complete, etc., etc. Patchwork is at peace if every realm in it is secure, i.e., it is orderly, and it maintains absolute control over its patch. Once again, no realm can ever be too secure, just as peace is always better than war, and no society can be too peaceful. Between realms, our goal is to achieve the same or nearly the same level of stability, without building anything like a centralized authority that would impose it. A centralized or federalized authority with the power of judgment or enforcement is itself the government. And if you try to split judgment and enforcement into competing agencies, you're just asking for trouble. Footnote: as Moldbug notes in A Gentle Introduction to Unqualified Reservations, perhaps the most significant fallacious principle in the Anglo-American democratic mind is the principle of division of authority, immortalized by Montesquieu as the separation of powers. Montesquieu, of course, was an Anglophile, and he was head over heels in love with the supposed balance of powers created by the glorious Revolution of 1688. To refute this principle, it should be sufficient to note that in the Britain of 2009, only one, at most, of Montesquieu's three powers still has any power at all, i.e., the House of Commons, the Crown, and the House of Lords having faded to mere symbolic significance. The at most caveat refers to the transfer of power, familiar to readers of the Crossman Diaries or viewers of Yes Minister, from Commons to the civil service. End footnote. Patchwork has no central authority or community of realms. It has conventions, such as rules protecting shared resources, the atmosphere, the oceans and the fish in them, orbital space, etc., from any abuse that would be collectively uneconomic. Sometimes people need to get together and update these rules, as with any system of rules, but they are only occasional delegates and do not constitute any sort of permanent organization. Sometimes realms must vote on these changes, but this is a rare event indeed. Turning the entire system into one big state is a failure mode, not a goal. So, for example, let's say a coalition of demented realms are taken over by administrations which, for some reason, are affrighted with the perils of global warming. Stipulating that global warming is a pile of nonsense. If not, substitute something else which is. And with pile of nonsense, he links to Climate Audit by Stephen McIntyre. They round up a majority and manage to change the rules for atmosphere, imposing carbon credits or some other such absurdity. Is that something that could happen in a patchwork world? Sure. What should the realms in the minority do? Go along with it, I'm afraid. This is the level of imperfection I think is acceptable in a design that remains basically peaceful. It is aggression in a sense, but of an inherently unprofitable form. What we don't want to see is a situation in which we get civil war. We get predation by some patches on other patches. We get standing internal alliances. We get patron-client relationships, etc., and all the nasty structures that arose under the old international order. A bit of an overzealous pollution control is a strain the system can handle. Our goal is thus to get, at the level of patchwork as a whole, as close to total security as we can. This is also complete stability. Ideally, politics is at a complete end, as is war as a means of political endeavor. Except through free and peaceful transfers of shares, there should be no further changes in power. Each realm and each patch should last forever. Frankly, if this isn't world peace, I don't know what is. I hope it's not too much peace for anyone. To go back just a second here, his thing about a bit of overzealous pollution control is a strain the system can handle. I think that he's probably a little too dismissive of something that could be a legitimate critique. And I think that part of the reason that he's doing that is just because, his goal here is to introduce the model. It's not to address every single potential criticism or objection. And, he wrote 4 really long chapters on it. I think that is probably a bigger problem than he would necessarily concede. But again, that doesn't mean that the model is broken. It just means that it's something else that has to be engineered. You just have to come up with some way, some network of incentives that prevent that from happening. And a really good way is to put that conversation out into the public sphere and have that concept be something people are aware of. Because if people are aware of that concept and they're persuaded that it's bad, then there's going to be a natural incentive to avoid that. So It's it's just an engineering thing, and I think that he's probably a little too dismissive of it, but it doesn't really bother me that he is. Okay. Transfers of shares that constitute a merger into bigger and bigger patches, eventually ending in a one-patch world, should be blocked in some way. Since realms do not control their shares, this cannot be done by restricting share transfers. However, it can be done by including a promise of independent ownership in the realm's resident covenant. Like any other item in the covenant, it can be violated, but usually not profitably. The basic secret of inter-realm relations in Patchwork is that it is much, much easier to construct rules for a community of rational or orderly sovereigns than for a community of irrational ones. Therefore, even in a world which contains both rational and irrational sovereigns, it is rational for rational sovereigns to have different rules for other rational sovereigns. This set, whether or not it covers the planet or is even geographically contiguous, constitutes Patchwork. At least if it is working as designed, there should be only one. Orderly sovereigns deal with each other in a very different way, because orderly sovereigns are sovereigns for whom deterrence always works. Therefore, it is extremely easy to discourage predation. It can be deterred either A, through collective disapproval, which might become quite costly, especially if the disapproval of other realms leads to the disapproval of one's present residents, as it almost certainly would, or B, all else failing, military retaliation. The reason that collective disapproval can be useful is because if other realms begin to collectively disapprove of the way that you're doing business in your realm, then the people who live in your realm are going to begin to disapprove as well, at which point they may look to leave your realm and move to another one, and property values begin to diminish as demand starts to ebb away for your real estate, which is, to go back to the beginning, that's the basis of the revenue model for these patches, is maximizing the value of their real estate. Military retaliation is important because in real life it is rather hard to make war profitable and rather easy to make it unprofitable. While there is no shortage of rational sovereigns in history, history's profitable wars are often best explained in terms of irrationality. For example, while Hitler's conquests of Czechoslovakia, Poland, and France may have been in themselves profitable, each of these three countries were more or less a client state of Great Britain, and counted irrationally on British assistance against Germany. As a result, not only did they not defend themselves, they were not prepared to even try to defend themselves. Among rational sovereigns, the theoretical military confrontations, which would otherwise occur between patchwork realms, and which there is no authority to prevent, will just not happen. Armaments will be gradually de-escalated, each side of each border prepared to inflict an adequate level of pain on the other in the event of any attempted aggression. At the end of the process, cross-border security cooperation between any two sovereigns will be at the same level as that between any two countries in the democratic world today, and security forces will revert to police forces. Of course, this process of complete de-escalation can only happen in an all-patchwork world. Irrational sovereigns can be aggressive in arbitrary ways for arbitrarily crazy reasons, and they are not necessarily deterrable. Against the rest of the world, patchwork is at least expected to stick together, possibly even forming joint security institutions, which are temporary, of course, based on the specific threat. This kind of highlights one of the biggest obstacles to getting to some sort of a patchwork-type world, and that is attaining some level of scale that allows the patch to operate as an independent unit and to be respected as an independent unit by other sovereigns around it. And that's really just a PR campaign. It's, you have to conceive of the structure, and then you have to have a model for creating the structure, for arriving at it, whether it's like some kind of a secession movement or whether you're purchasing the land. If you become an entity and you gather enough people and enough resources together and you purchase a plot of land from some sort of existing sovereign, some country, maybe you purchase an island from a country and begin to operate your patch as a sovereign unit, you need to have really, really good PR, because any other institution that tries to subvert and take over and occupy your patch needs to realize that they would have to deal with a really bad PR campaign against them. So it comes down to the ability to control a narrative, which is, again, it's an engineering problem. You have to be able to put yourself in a position where you control what the rest of the world thinks about your patch and the existence of your patch, why it exists, the purpose for it, and the nature of the people within it. The people with it, because I mean that would be the first model, is to attack your patch and the people within it, and to disparage them as white supremacists or terrorists or slavery advocates or whatever other thing they want to come up with. Because if the media could successfully do that, then people would turn a blind eye and wouldn't care if you were being invaded or occupied or subverted in some way. So there's a very strong incentive to keep your nose clean and be incredibly conciliatory and generous and above board, and really emphasize the humanity of your movement, and leave all the bad PR stuff for once you've attained some level of ability to control and defend yourself as a sovereign unit. And then from then forward, the biggest threat would be internally, that you get some sort of an internal movement that's seeded and grows up from within and subverts the power structure of the organization and reverts it back to some sort of a democracy. This is the direction that I kind of would see things going, that you would need to protect and defend against. Okay, back to Moldbug. Okay, of course, this process of complete de-escalation can only happen in an all-patchwork world. Irrational sovereigns can be aggressive in arbitrary ways for arbitrarily crazy reasons, and they are not necessarily deterrable. Against the rest of the world, patchwork is at least expected to stick together, possibly even forming joint security institutions, which are temporary, of course, based on the specific threat. The general attitude of patchwork toward the world outside is neutrality. This, of course, was the staple of American foreign policy for a century, which might well be described as one of the only things Washington has ever done right. No more need be said about this well-known approach, due, of course, to George Washington himself. The rules of neutrality are well understood under classical or 19th century international law, a considerable improvement on its 20th century successor. Patchwork will defend itself from the rest of the world, but never attack. It will trade if allowed, not if otherwise. Basically, it will keep its head down and try its best to avoid surrendering sovereignty in any way. It will try to keep its trade balanced, avoid accepting loans and currencies it cannot print, maintain resource, food, and energy independence to whatever extent possible, etc., etc., etc. Its advantage is in its vitality and economic efficiency, and it will maintain this. Especially, each realm and patchwork as a whole each realm and patchwork as a whole will do their best to avoid any compromise of sovereignty. A slice of sovereignty is what each shareholder in each realm holds, and it is not to be surrendered for any reason. And while there may be a theoretical incentive for individual realms to free ride in defending the whole, surely the loss of reputation capital exceeds any potential profit to ride freely. I'm sure that to many Democrats, patchwork seems like a design for permanent global tyranny. This is just something we'll have to work through. However, it is indisputable that, at least if it works as planned, patchwork will produce world peace. And it is certainly reactionary. Just think of it as a cross between the Holy Alliance, the Hanseatic League, and the National Basketball Association, with all the advantages of each and the downsides of none. The Holy Alliance being the coalition linking the monarchist great powers of Austria, Prussia, and Russia. It was created after the final defeat of Napoleon at the behest of Emperor Alexander I of Russia and signed in Paris on 26 September 1815. The alliance aimed to restrain liberalism and secularism in Europe in the wake of the devastating French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars, and it nominally succeeded at this until the Crimean War. Otto von Bismarck managed to reunite the Holy Alliance following the unification of Germany in 1871, but the alliance again faltered by the 1880s over Austrian and Russian conflicts of interest over the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. And then the Hanseatic League was a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds and market towns in northwestern and central Europe. Growing from a few German towns in the late 1100s, the League came to dominate Baltic maritime trade for 3 centuries along the coasts of northern Europe. Hansa territories stretched from the Baltic to the North Sea and inland during the late Middle Ages and diminished slowly after 1450. And then obviously the National Basketball Association. Everyone knows what that is. So that is the end of Patchwork. And now, if you've watched all 4 videos, you can say that you've read Patchwork.
There you go.
All right, so let me...
You're welcome.
You've got about 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me take on some of the comments here. We've got Popular Liberty in the house. Josiah Bartlett says Whig history equals water distillation is sufficient, but it leaves acid and takes good minerals. Can you rephrase that comment? I don't understand what you're meaning. I understand that you're making a good point, but my brain didn't track with it. Josiah Bartlett says Jeremiah 6:16, stand by the roads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it and find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk in it. Huh. Interesting how history repeats itself, almost like there's a cycle, almost like time is cyclical. Interesting. Mark, what's up? He says, sup, kings. So Popular Liberty says, yes, democracy is a declaration of war on private property. That thought had occurred to me almost in exactly that sense just the other day, and I can't remember why. But basically, we live in a world where there's essentially no conception for or appreciation for private property. What we call private property isn't remotely private. The whole private-public distinction is just completely meaningless in a whole variety of ways, because what's public is definitely not public, and what's private is definitely not private. Ultimately, property rights are secured by violence and the ability to use violence to defend it. And if you are not willing or able to use violence to defend your property from all takers, then you don't own it. It's not yours. You've leased it. You've rented it. So all land that's supposedly private property today is all rented, and it's actually owned by whatever corporate governance structure controls it. And that structure controls it not because of some fancy reasoning or whatever. It controls it because it controls the guns that control that area. Ultimately, it all rests on violence, and attempts to eliminate violence is way too. I think we talked about this the other day, that trying to get rid of violence altogether creates the worst kinds of violence. Violence is a necessity. You can't have property without violence, because you have to have the capacity for violence, and the capacity for violence includes actually using it. If you can use violence and you never do, then you don't actually have the capacity for violence. The capacity for violence requires that you use it. Democracy hates security because security means it can't expropriate property. Matt, we're at the end stage of empire and republic. Corruption is running rampant. You can just corrupt this Patrick idea into existence. Yeah, that's how the monarchies of Europe were created. The original monarchs were grifters and crooks who owned the land, mostly former military. Democracy is war, and if you don't participate, then you don't believe in self-defense. Yes. Libertarianism, politically, libertarianism is pacifism. It's the refusal to use self-defense. And when you say, oh, well, we can't do stuff, we can't use the government, we can't get involved in using actual power. We're going to try to win elections, but we're not going to try to use actual power. What you're saying is that you don't believe you have property rights because you aren't willing to use the means that are necessary or that are provided to you to defend your property rights or to secure them in the first place. So if you think that if you have this belief in private property, you have to be willing to participate in democracy, to protect your property rights. And maybe not even to protect them, but just to secure them because you don't have them in the first place. In a corrupt system, participating in a corrupt system when it's the only system that exists is not corruption. That's just using the tools that are in front of you. So if you can manipulate the corruption in such a way that it provides for you and your family and your community, then that's just you playing by the rules. If you have a problem with that, that's fine, but just recognize that you refusing to participate is functionally the same as just surrendering and accepting the dominion of the people who are willing to participate. With that being said, do you have anything else you want to say, Stephen? Because I'm good to go.
I'm great.
All right. Well then, folks, we appreciate you guys hanging out again for another episode here of King Pilled. We finished this chapter. I don't understand, or I don't know. I'm reading him. He said, I will never understand libertarians like Michael Malice who don't believe in voting. I can understand them. I can, because I used to see things that way, but it's hard for me to believe that I actually saw things that way and thought that it was coherent or made any sense. But yeah, anyway, so you can follow me on Twitter at RealKingPilled. You can follow Mr. Liberal Steve on Twitter at Messina Inc. And we will.
You might probably, looking at my notifications here, you already probably are following me because, I made an observation. Actually, I made the observation a couple days ago, but I only tweet because I was just like, man, this would be a good tweet. And I was like, nah, who gives a fuck? And then I was like, yeah, you know what? It was a good observation. But it was that I was grabbing Chick-fil-A.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
And the app limited me to one sauce per item. And if you know anything about Chick-fil-A, they have their shit together in terms of efficiency, just generally speaking. I mean, there can be a fucking double line drive-through around the entire building. And I don't know out there, all the Liberty lovers out there, if you have access to Chick-fil-A or not, but that line, that double drive-through line, I mean, maybe it's 5 minutes. It looks like if it was a line at McDonald's or Cookout or something like that, I mean, you would think you would have to be there for a week, but man, these little Christians keep it moving. And so my alarm bells went off when I saw that they limited the sauce. And I just tweeted that basically that was a more significant indicator of, the state of the supply chain than anything else that would be in the news. And I don't even know if Twitter numbers go this high, but it looks like it's been retweeted 33 times and has 284 likes. Did the numbers go? Did Jack have to rewrite the algorithm for that? Or,
I think so.
You know what I mean?
I don't think it's possible to get that level of engagement.
I imagine whether you guys know it or not, you're probably already following me, so you don't have to check.
Steven's basically the president, is what he's trying to say. So you can write yourself your own stimulus checks.
Yeah, fucking A. I mean, I have 253 followers, so yeah, I think I'll be good financially. I think I can pretty much just coast from here on out on fame.
It's a good day when you get more likes than you have followers.
Yeah, that's right. I think Pete Quinones retweeted it is maybe what to be honest is probably what happened.
I retweeted it too.
So. Oh, well, that explains all the Liberty lovers who are also retweeting and liking. So thank you guys.
Jason said Liberty lovers on the show on Wealth, Power, and Influence yesterday, I think.
I would have spazzed out if I heard that.
I was just like, oh.
That's my man right there.
Does
he do does he sell 20-minute phone conversations? I bet he does, but they're probably wildly expensive.
Yeah. You can get a private 1-hour consultation with him.
I would have to take on a mortgage for it probably. I'll just
it's $1,500.
I'll put a down payment with I'll put a down payment with the stimulus check.
Yeah. Let him know that you're putting a security deposit down on buying an hour with him.
Right. Yeah. You know what was heartbreaking is I noticed the date on that letter, although it just came to my door today. The date was from a while ago, and my worst fears were confirmed when I checked my bank, and I basically got direct deposited in March.
So you spent it weeks ago.
No, you're just fucked.
Oh, that's a terrible feeling.
Oh well, yeah, it hurt. It hurt a little bit.
R.I.P. Stephen.
Yep, correct.
Alrighty, well, we'll see you guys again on Monday about 1:00. We'll probably be late again. And then we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks, because hopefully I get this pickup truck into our household, and then on Wednesday we're planning on piecing our way out here and driving up to Washington State. So we'll see if that happens. We'll keep you guys posted. Just keep an eye out on Twitter. That's where I'll shout out whatever is going to happen. I'll probably post about it on Facebook too, for those of you who are friends of mine there. But we will see you again on Monday. Deuces.